There's no control anywhere, all right? And people are going to try to sell you the illusion of control, but it's not going to be able to hold up. But that's not to say that there's no hope. Very, very far from it. Because the present and the future, if I can talk about the future, they look like a great big tug of war over who gets to have control. Now, to be very honest, you're outmanned and you're outgunned and you're overwhelmed. But the biggest threat to all institutions, and government is simply the largest of the institutions, have to all this hyperconnectivity. The largest threat is irrelevance, because hyperconnected individuals have the power to make their own way through the world. Now, that's not a bad thing. In fact, if you manage it right, that's going to help shift some of the burden from you, because they're going to shoulder it themselves. So perhaps the wisest thing that you could do as a strategy is to figure out ways to help them on their way, figure out ways to help empower them. Because remember, help is very, very rarely irrelevant, and assistance is a subtle but very potent way to remain involved. It's not necessarily the same thing as control, but it means that you have a continuing and vital role. So, what kind of help do we need? It breaks very neatly down into two different dimensions. All right. First, and the most important thing, is you need to think about, in your organizations and exterior to your organizations, both across government and across the South Australian public, you must figure out how to quickly, efficiently, and effectively share your enormous expertise. Share it so thoroughly and so completely that it transforms the relationship between the government and the citizens. Now, what does that look like? Okay, let's consider the most successful example of sharing that the world has ever seen, Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia, I think every other day we now see another academic poo-pooing or pissing on or saying Wikipedia doesn't work and it's wrong and it's this and it's that and the other thing. Wikipedia is more accurate than Britannica now, ladies and gentlemen, and it's 10 times bigger than Britannica now. Why? Because Wikipedia took a band of very dedicated people, and 1 year and 1 week ago, in this very room, in this very spot, the founder of Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales, talked about the basic idea behind Wikipedia, which was love, as he put it. I would say it's sharing. It's the desire to share what you know, the love that comes from loving knowledge. And it was a small band of people who shared and shared and shared until what they were sharing became so potent that it brought other people in who then shared, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. Now, what you know is specific. What Wikipedia knows is very broad and not very deep. What you know is the opposite. It's somewhat more narrow, but it has a lot of depth. And that makes it even more potent, because that means there's going to be people in South Australia who are going to be very much in love with what you have to share and are going to be willing to help you in that sharing task. But this is a task that you have to pump on. You have to take the time, you have to take the energy, and take the enormous knowledge resources that are locked up in your heads. Because the thing that Wikipedia has done is it's allowed us to basically unscrew the cap on our heads and dump that knowledge out so that everyone can see it, particularly within our organizations. But then, once we've managed to improve our organizations by sharing the knowledge across them, then out across the wider communities. Now, when you start sharing, South Australians will respond. And it's going to require dedication and resources. It takes time to get a wiki going. A lot of wikis or knowledge-sharing experiments fail because people just simply aren't prepared to put in the hard yards for it. But once it gets going, the benefits so radically outweigh the costs that I can make this recommendation unreservedly. Now, that's half of the solution. But sharing expertise, while it's necessary, is insufficient on its own. It's basically a purely factual exercise. And purely factual exercises are only a small part of human experience. Most of human experience is subjective and it's conversational. Now, governments, even the most local and the most friendly governments, basically are always seen as interlopers, coming down from on high with commandments and taxes and planning requirements. And so the thing that the government needs in that respect is a sense of connection and continuity with the citizens that they're serving. Now, Australians are very much better natured about the relationship to government than Americans do, because Americans tend to, when they're pissed off behind the government, go into a compound and get a lot of weapons until the FBI breaks in. We just saw this happen in Texas. But what South Australia can do is say, okay, the connection and the community are the things that are important here. That in fact, the transparency of the processes of government, and remember that in a democracy, transparency is how a government maintains its legitimacy. And trust me, you can look at New South Wales if you want to understand the reverse of that. All right. That, in fact, that transparency and that continuity is maintained by a continuous and evolving conversation with the governed. Now, that conversation right now, we mostly think of it as being confined to the hustings or to the ballot box. But in fact, the conversation is always going on and has always gone on, whether or not the government chooses to participate in it. You find people at the pub talking about the government. You find people at a dinner party. You find people at the street talking about the government. Well, that's always gone on since we've had governments in Australia. But now, that conversation is hyper-connected. And that conversation now has more potency than the government. It's just not necessarily being used. But trust me, there are going to be plenty of pennies dropping in that respect as they're starting to drop all over the place. But if you decide to become involved in that conversation, if you continuously converse with the communities at every point of connection, then you can build the consensus and you can leverage the goodwill that comes from sharing your expertise into a detailed discussion between the governed and the government. And you can do that in a way that ensures the continued prosperity for South Australians. Now, conversation is not a one-off, and this is the biggest mistake that governments make. For example, all right, conversations are about relationships, and they're relationships between people. And it's only possible to have a conversation between individuals. Institutions pronounce, people converse, and that means that as you enter into a conversation with the citizens, it's not the institution that's talking. And I know that's very hard. That's going to be a difficult transition. But the institution cannot talk. The institution only pronounces. People talk. And so you have to empower the people in your own institutions to be able to talk. Yeah, okay, they're going to get some things wrong. They're not going to say some right things. If people are involved in a conversation, they're going to be forgiving enough. If they're not being pronounced at, they're going to understand that people say stupid things in conversation and they're going to forgive them. And if you don't, you end up with something like the 2020 summit, where the conversation was so managed and time constrained that most of the summiteers went away disappointed because they realized they were basically talked into agreeing to Labour's talking points. So, this is where we are right now. South Australia, the government, is the route that's about to be struck at high speed by the oncoming car of hyperconnectivity. It could be very, very ugly. Or what happened if the Roo just sort of landed on the roof and went for a ride? Okay? That's the opportunity here, because South Australia has amazing resources. The rest of the day is going to be talking about the technological, the intellectual, and the social resources. But can you put those resources to work? Now, as an example, let me mention, and I don't need to elevate this one above any of the other technologies today, but I have one that's just taken me and just really, really thrilled me with the ideas and the possibilities of it, which is Podmo. All right. Now, Podmo transformed basically dull as dishwater mobile phones that we all have and we all use into a whole new platform for being able to share knowledge and engage in conversation, because it basically rethinks what the mobile is capable of. It says, well, the mobile isn't just about a relationship with a carrier and then through that to the public. The mobile is about a relationship with all of the other people carrying the mobiles. And all these other people have interesting things to share and interesting things to say. And this is already being put to work in the Podmo network in schools and TAFEs so that people can share information across the community and do it seamlessly and do it free and do it basically sort of just invisibly. Now, if, for example, a department or a government embraced this or something like this and the ideas that it embodies, if you put your weight behind it, and if you said that we as a government take the strategy that the broad sharing of our knowledge and expertise is the best thing that we can do to empower people, and to remain engaged in continuous conversation with them so that they always understand where you are, and that this entire barrier between us and they starts to collapse, because there's no us and they in conversation, there's only just us. If you can do that, then you can transform governance, and you can set the standard for all the rest of Australia. Now, it won't be perfect. Nothing new ever is, but it'll be good. And